Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me fine? All right, good. I'm going to try to shout. I'm still on UK time, so I've been up since 3 a.m., so, you know.
Hi, I'm from UK.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Where?
I'm from Plymouth.
Okay.
And you're from Sheffield?
Yes.
Sheffield
Yeah.
University.
Yeah, so still on that time, so basically if I fall asleep in the middle of the presentation, it's not you, it's me. So basically just brief introductions. As it said in the profile, I'm Ron Dyer, and I am at the University of Sheffield's Management School in the Executive Education Department, and I'm responsible for basically the overall portfolio on risk and projects and project management in that area. But I also have 3 other roles within that area. One of them is the emerging role of handling the EMBA program for internal staff only, which is basically not open to the public, but it's a private program we have for our institutional capacity and capability building within the school. And I also sit on the executive committee for program development for all our custom programs that we do. And I'll get into a little bit more about that when I get into the Q&A session and the discussion after. So basically, I said, this piece of work comes out of 4 years of work that I did previously in the area when I was at the University of Liverpool, and we were dealing with students at the MSc in project management level. And one of the problems that we had, to set some context, was when I got to the school, there was basically no risk embedded into the risk management program. It's a very qualitative program with no actual quantitative risk management, and it never really focused on risk, and to no fault of the actual academic who was running the program, because she said she knew nothing about it, and basically she was just a doorstop, as she referred to herself, because there was nobody there at the time. So from that point, it was basically starting with where we are. So basically the aims and objectives was to basically define what we were going to do to reinvent this program, because we had 3 different problems. 1 was content, 2 was engagement, and 3 was the industry alignment. So we have several bodies. Here you have the PMI, we have the APM and the PMI in the UK, as well as the Institute of Risk Management. And one of the big issues that was coming out from them was the whole thing around, right, you're training these people in the area of project management. We're specifically interested in people with risk management expertise in certain areas, but they neither have good risk assessment skills or good quantitative skills to embody that. So we had to look for a way to basically do that. So today we're going to talk about this, and there are a couple takeaways. So without reading through all of them, is looking at the whole concept of deep learning, because we were less focused on theory and people embedding learning what to do in terms of to pass an exam. We're much more focused on what you take away and how you apply it and how to measure that success, because that was more important for me at that point in time. We would eventually get to the point where we would reach that curve where we have the right balance between the theory and the practice to get the people into industry. So that was one thing. Then in doing this process and changing over from a very linear curriculum format to one that was much more liberal in terms of its approach, what did I learn from the experience, and also what did the students learn from the experience? Because that was one of the biggest challenges. One of the biggest challenges, and I'll get into it a little later, was actually the whole concept of getting a traditional Russell Group school that's almost 200 years old to basically understand why you would use a game to teach versus just teaching the class. And that was literally climbing Everest twice with 10 people on your back. You know, it literally took about 18 months just to get them to say, okay, you can change the curriculum, but you can change one thing, one assessment only. We want the exams, we want everything to remain the same. You can change one assignment. That took the longest period of time. So the other thing that we need to look at is how we mapped and measure. Now, my focus in terms of looking at anything around gamification of serious games is really on measurement and metrics. So the analytics. I'm less interested at this point in terms of the design, because I think there are amazing people doing great off-the-shelf products. The problem is that if we want to justify the experience to the higher ups and get the budget, they want the metrics all the time. That's the big deal. They're less interested in how nice the game is and from a bells and whistles perspective. They want to know about how it aligns to learning outcomes, how it aligns to teaching strategies. We have things like PLAs, program level approach. They're interested in that type of stuff, and they want to see metrics of engagement, either coming out of an actual LMS that it's aligned to, or something that we actually do ourselves. And then, of course, last was some tips from my own experience in the trenches of what happens. So an overview, basically, what we wanted to do. We wanted to be able to enable students to understand the techniques around managing projects from a risk management perspective. And we had a series of things that we wanted to do. So first of all is we wanted to create a balance between a focus on both the qualitative and the quantitative aspects of risk, because there was a bias towards the qual because of the previous teaching style, but we also needed to have the balance towards the quant, even if it was introductory quant in terms of what you would call first moment and second moment statistical analysis that would help them to be able to understand how to measure the different types of risk profiles, et cetera, within the different types of risk management situations they would deal with. The second thing was to understand the overall technical nature in terms of where risk management fits within the project management body of knowledge, how it is used, because there was a layer of abstraction between what they perceive as a project manager, which is for them basically a Microsoft projects software, and the actual work that's actually done behind the scenes in terms of planning, logistics, etc., behind it. So we needed to contextualize that it's not just about you putting in a bunch of tasks in a Gantt chart, typing it up, and making sure the bars look the right color, and printing it out. So that was the technical side. And then we have one of the bigger challenges, balancing skill levels. Because originally, we did not have a class that had a proper balance in terms of both the quantitative and the experience. So we had people from a diverse number of backgrounds, coming from everything from agriculture to they did an undergraduate degree in law, and then they were coming into project management for whatever reason, and therefore we could not assume that from a knowledge perspective that everybody was at the same level. So we had to find a way to capture and baseline that so that we have a good starting point, and then from that perspective we also have a good jumping off point to get to the intermediate level. We knew we would never in a short space of time be able to get to an advanced level of risk management because we just did not have the time or the resources, but to at least achieve the two. And basically, well, the last one was just to basically understand the prerequisites in terms of where they are with two of the tools that we used. Basic math competence, so descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, that type of stuff, and also where they were using a tool like Excel. Because we opted to use Excel as the tool in the initial stage because universally available. We don't have to worry about buying anything, it's right there. So on the other side of it, we have the development. So we looked at a couple things. The objectives, these are just the objectives of what we had for the program at the time. So development of an appropriate risk breakdown structure, evaluate capital expenditure exposure, understand the importance of controlling risk, implementing an effective risk control process, and develop a risk evaluation strategy. Now, one of the things I will say is in terms of getting this right, we had to also fix the module before and the module after. Because as we advanced this module, those two modules automatically fell behind in terms of quality. So we actually didn't end up fixing one. We had to actually fix all three of them, in tandem in order to be able to do that. And that was a huge challenge because at the time when I took up this challenge, I had just joined the university and I was not head of program. So I was trying to convince somebody else who was head of program why this was beneficial. And of course, again, when we talk about it, if you don't have buy-in and the person thinks that it's too much work to do and they're happy with the way it is, then basically you're not going anywhere. So that was one of the other things. So how did we get to that point? So what we did, or what I did, was we started with basically a module evaluation process. So we took all the modules, and when I say all three, the first one, which is an introduction to project planning, we took the risk module, and we took the project management and controls module, and we did a thorough evaluation of those modules. We looked at the content, and we also mapped that content against not only what other universities were doing, but we also mapped them against what industry jobs were asking for. So it was not just a one-fit process where we just said, okay, fine, we're going to look at this and we're going to change. We looked at it from the standpoint of, if you want to call it triangulation. And in that process, we looked at the student feedback, student performance. I ran a series of focus groups with previous and present students. So we had an understanding of what they felt were the deficits, because some of the students from the year before were willing to participate and they were in industry and they were indicating what they didn't get that they needed when they went into industry. And they were experiencing deficits in, and they had to be trained. So a lot of students say, for instance, they had to walk into the organization and then the organizations had to pay for them for specific types of training in certain areas. And when you talk to the employee on the other side, they were saying that they really didn't expect to have to be building those skills. They were expected to platform or scaffold those skills in some form or fashion. So they were a little bit disappointed in that respect. The other thing was basically program benchmarking. So we had to look at it in the context of not changing the way assignments are designed, not changing the time, not changing the delivery in any shape, form, or fashion in terms of, because we're bound by not just the requirements of the Higher Education Authority and NSS scores and everything else in the UK, but we're also bound by the policies of the Central University, which are very, very tight. And if you want to change something in a module, it requires at least 12 months approval or more. So even if I want to change it for this September, I would have had to do it last year in spring. And if I don't know that what I want to do for this September, I still have to think about it from last year in spring. Otherwise, I'm not getting it through until next year, which may be too late. So that was one of the other things. From there, we went on to the second stage, which was basically distilling all that information, aggregating it, and basically coming up with new content design, looking at the skills, and the identification. So what do we do? In order to figure out how to get to that, and I'll get back to the constructive alignment, which is alludes to the title in the presentation of deep learning, we looked at the following. We decided that in order for the module to be successful, we had to ground it in practice. We could not ground it in just theory, because it was grounded in theory before, and it obviously wasn't working. So we needed something that was a little bit more robust in terms of, okay, fine, the theory is easy. We can find textbooks that will deliver all the different aspects of project management. But we need to find from industry, particularly in the case of the UK, content that relates to what are you doing now in your industry, and how are you using those tools so that we can ground that experience. So to do that, we had several conversations. I was fortunate enough because I was working on a research project with BAE, which is the equivalent of Lockheed here, British Aerospace Engineering, which builds their Harrier jump jet and all those other types of defense contracting stuff. So I had a team of them initially look at it because they have the highest level of project managers who do the most quantitative stuff. So I had them look at it through the research that I was doing, and then they also recommended different people. So I also went out to the professional bodies, both the PMI and the Association for Project Management. And I sat on 2 of their special interest groups for about 3 months. I would attend the meetings and I would ask questions to gain and bolster what was going on and what they were doing. Some of the stuff they were not doing, but they felt, yeah, because of the way the market was changing, they should be. And there was other stuff that they were doing that we weren't. So it was a good balance in that respect. So that took care of the market relevance. From a theoretical perspective, I took stuff out. So understanding that we teach in blocks. So it's an entire day of that module on one day for 8 weeks. The problem is that you are heavy in the class for literally 8 hours. It's a very stressful day for you because you're standing there from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., with the exception of lunch, teaching the same thing for the entire day. And you have students who are basically, once you get to probably about 11 o'clock, they completely forget about you. They're either thinking about lunch, or you know they're skipping the afternoon session of your class, because basically you've got 200 people in the class, and then when you come back after lunch, it's about 50. You know, if you get more than 50, say thank God. That was usually lucky for me, you know, if you get them. So we had that problem as well. So from a theory standpoint, when we looked at the risk theory, we took out a lot of the stuff on the higher end, and we focused on what we call core skills. So core skills, again, scaffolding the core skills in terms of, one, what were the necessary quantitative skills they would need at the first level? What were the necessary qualitative skills? So things like descriptive statistics was a start. They need to know that. All the different moments from first to fourth, skew, kurtosis, and we ended there. We said we're not doing any of the other stuff. So there's no structural equation modeling anymore. There's no advanced mathematics or anything like that. On the qualitative side, we said, right, what do we need to do? They need to be able to assess risk, so heuristics. Narrative, the ability to interrogate and interpret data in some form or fashion. We took out all the Monte Carlo simulations. We took out all the regression analysis, and we focused on the core concepts because we realized that in order to accomplish this, we could not do it all in one session. So that was the theoretical premise. And then we contextualize it. We took out the teaching, and we made it case-based. So instead of walking into the class for a risk session for 8 weeks and standing there and clicking my life away, slide after slide, we took something that was relevant, and we basically, so reading through the FT, reading through Business Week, reading through whatever else, you find a common topic. So we would find a common topic, or at least I would choose one, or a couple of them, and then I would build a discussion around that for the entire course. So the first one we did was the failed construction by the Chinese of a resort in the Bahamas called Bahama Ma. And we also did the Concordia, the cruise ship that crashed off the coast of Greece. That was the second year. And we would basically, so I would gather all the information on that, everything about it, background, and I would basically put that, and it would start from the process when they get in the class on the first day. They should have read, as students are supposed to, the article, and we always pray that they do. They never do, and then we move from there, and we go, right, what has happened here? If you were doing this, what are the risk identification issues? And then we move all the way up from the qualitative, all the way up to the data. So whether it's real data or fictitious data. And then, of course, applicability. Then, for the last 2 sessions, I do absolutely nothing, which is great. I stand in a room, and I give them the opportunity to then apply it. So we take another series, and we get them to choose stuff, and they then basically apply it. So they would choose a topic of interest from any newspaper article, any case study, and they would work on it, and they would then present it to me and to other people in the class. So that's how we started the process. On the other side, we had to ground it in all the theory that goes with education development. So basically, we looked at the content equity, so nothing that is too difficult for somebody who does not know the topic, or too boring for somebody who has advanced concepts. That was a huge challenge because it was finding a base point of where do we start with a point of interest. And how we achieve that is by basically, we basically did a pre-reading list. And we said to people, here are 10 or 11 topics. You are to read these before the start of the semester. And basically, if you think that it's something that you grasp, you flag it. And then those students help the students who don't grasp it. And so what we had was exception reporting, which was an interesting thing because you would find that the students who were engineers were all good at the quantitative stuff. And the students who were like law and English literature were good at the qualitative stuff. So it actually balanced it off in terms of that respect. The other thing that was important was looking at engagement because again, I said we have an 8-hour class. And it's very tough for me to be engaged for 8 hours, much less for somebody to stand for 150 or 80 students to sit in a class for an entire day. So we looked at the engagement standpoint in terms of where do we find something that breaks the monotony of all this, particularly in a subject which I find exciting, but they probably don't, as risk. They probably don't find it as exciting. They would rather do the marketing course instead. So we had to find something that was engaging. So that led us to what we would do from a game perspective. So we wanted something that was fun, but not too much fun, because I was careful with that. Because when I mentioned that they were going to be doing games, they thought they were getting PlayStations. And I was like, no, we're not setting up a PlayStation lab. That has its own consequences. And we also wanted to keep interest, but we wanted the exploration aspect of it. And then, of course, on the other side, we wanted all the requirements with flow. We want them to get deeply engaged. And this is where the whole concept of constructive alignment based on Big's theory comes in. That we wanted to basically map this experience to a learning process that is not only guided by me as the academic, but also guided by the experiences of the student through engagement in a topic that they would not otherwise want to be engaged with. And this is not a problem with risk management. This is a problem with all quantitative subjects for anyone who is not quantitatively inclined. And that's basically 85% of the class in most of these cases. There's about 15% who are really good at this stuff, and the rest of the people, you start going down, less engaged, but by the time you get, if you look at it from a distribution standpoint, well over 50% of the people in the class have no interest in this. They're doing it because it's a required course. If you said it were elective, the class would shrink. And I know this because when I do my strategic risk management class, the class shrinks from 160 to 16 every year. I can close my eyes and I can pick exactly who the people are who are going to come to that class. So this process, using constructive alignment, as I said, the intended learning outcomes. So we took the learning outcomes from our existing program and we said, right, we have these 8 learning outcomes, which are standard across the design of all modules. What do we do with them besides just simply go at the end when we do the student feedback evaluation? Tick, 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 tick. And my head of department goes, great, you've done your job, your scores are 4.0 or above, we leave you alone. You don't go into the principal's office to be disciplined for bad teaching. So that was the first thing. Then how would we assess? That was where one of the real challenges came in, because the challenge process with that is not the what to assess, but to get the shift from an assignment that is an essay of 2,500 words or greater to an assignment that is game-based, that you cannot quantify in that way and still get the necessary nuggets of information you want from the standpoint of performance, but also appease the gods in the assessment office who want to make sure that when you hand it in, they have something that can fit in to turn it in and get a score. You can't fit the game in to turn it in. That's the problem. So you needed something like that. And then the last part was, how are we going to teach? So how do we teach this game? Do you stand in front of the computer lab and you click through and you tell people do this, or do you just throw it into the lab, which is what I did, and I got my PhD students to do 1 or 2 sessions with them, and then I just left them alone. But what we did is we tracked the number of logins. So we gave them 3 attempts. The first is a freebie, and the second and third are for your scoring. And we take the mean of the scores. So that, because if we left them to just simply say try it, they would be playing it all through the semester to try and get the perfect score and lose sight of what was going on. So that was one of the things we had to do to not get people carried away. With me so far? Yeah. Right, so how did we choose the game? So we had, the minute we said, let's do this, we have tons of vendors telling us that they have a panacea for us in terms of stuff. It's amazing the minute that you put out a call for this, how many people suddenly have a tool. There's an app for that, literally. So you wake up one morning and you send an email out and you say, ask the student support people, can you send out to vendors this expression of interest? And then they come back and you're thinking they're going to bring maybe 3 or 4, and they come with a giant manila folder. Everyone in the UK who does a game wants, even if I had healthier games, I had that focused on emergency response, which my students know nothing about because it's the wrong area, med school. I had engineering games, building a warship. I had leadership games, everything. You had to sift through them. So in order to do that, again, staying within the concept of constructive alignment, I used and also some theory from the area of game-based learning. First of all, we looked at playability. How easy is this game to play? And does it scaffold? So does it go from easy to much more rigorous so that we get this baseline when people start and then move up? Is it applicable? So basically, once we got rid of all the other stuff, we focused on games that were ops or project management or decision sciences related only. So that took care of that thing. Then scalability. Can we make this game bigger? Can we pull other things out of it in terms of, besides playing the game and getting a good score, is there something else we can do? So, and the answer is yes, and I will talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the feedback, as well as the reflection. And in terms of when they play this, do we have the ability to build in some sort of reflective practice? Because this comes back to the whole concept of the constructive alignment. Because we want deep learning, we don't want surface learning. We don't want people to just simply remember all the theory or all the terminology associated with risk, and they cram it, and then you do a multiple choice exam, which we don't do, at all. We forbid multiple choice exams at the graduate level. And then basically, they just regurgitate. And we've seen it when we looked at the exam scripts from before. You have questions where you ask a specific question, but what you get is the theory in the answer for the first 3 or 4 paragraphs. What they do is they take the content and they dump it in, and they hope and pray that you, as the marker, will find some nugget of information in there that relates to what they're doing and makes it happen. So this was the game. We chose this game, Unlock Project Management, by a small firm in Coventry that actually did a specific game for project management. And basically, the game is really as it says. It's a high-pressure project scenario. It's a disaster relief on a fictitious island. And basically, they have a budget, they have a time frame, and they also have stakeholders. And what was interesting about this is that it met all the requirements of playability, applicability, reflection, etc., because of these 3 there. And I will explain a little bit more in terms of detail. The goal is that you have to get the stakeholders all happy. The more important goal is that you have to get all the stakeholders to be green, not green, green, yellow, or yellow, green, green, or any combination of that. It was important for them to get all the stakeholders happy throughout the process. And that's what gave it that element of complexity. Because as they balanced through, and from some of the narratives that the students talked about, one of the interesting things was they kept asking me, how do I get the primary stakeholder happy? They kept asking, is there a cheat? Is there a way I can do this? Because they would play it, they would go through, and I'll give you an example. So for instance, one of the things they had is in the initial building, they had to buy tents. And they bought these tents, and just as they bought the tents and they set it up, because of the way the game adapts through the AI, it gave another hurricane. So all the tents blew away. On top of that, they bought the tents, they didn't involve the main stakeholder, which is Alejandro, who is the Indian chief on the island, in the process, and they didn't buy mats from him because they bought these fancy tents through a UN relief effort. They didn't involve the people on the ground at all. So not only did they lose the tents, but he then complained to the CEO that he was unhappy that they were not at all involved in the process. So immediately, people are there happily going along playing, the scenario changes, and their score goes down. And they have to go back in and reevaluate every step that they've taken up to that point from planning and buy new tents, but then that has another implication. You're halfway through your project, you only have so much money left, you have another decision to make, you have to understand the trade-off between cost and time, which is essentially 2 of the major components of risk management from an iron triangle perspective. So the minute you start spending more money on new tents that are more expensive, you start running out of time because you need to go back and build, but you also have less money within the last 3 or 4 weeks of your project to get everything done. So one of the interesting things is that looking at this is that they found this to be much more challenging than they had estimated. They thought it was going to be a really simple fly-through. Click, 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 click. But because the algorithms keep changing all the time, they always had a scenario where they were faced with something that they could not balance it off. Now, some people managed to get it right, but nobody got it right the first time, which was the whole goal. We did not want anybody to get it right the first time, because then that defeats the whole purpose of the exercise. So that was the game. What did we learn? So, and I called it best practices and not so best, because I didn't want to call it worst. So the first thing was the not underestimating the players in terms of, we classify everybody because we think, here's a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, all brought up in technology, all accustomed to playing games, they'll be fine. But here's the thing. You have a diverse group of people. I have Chinese students in my class. I have European students in my class. I have Latin American students in my class. I have British students in my class. And one of the things was, in terms of the planning, the assuming player homogeneity was a bad idea. Because when we set the baseline, we just said, right, this is the baseline. Everybody should be here. And then we realized as we went through, well, particularly my graduate assistants, some people needed more help than others, and therefore that shifted us down a bit in terms of what we should expect when we ran it the second time. The other thing that we had to look at was the player autonomy. We wanted people to collaborate. No one did. It was a hostile, dog-eat-dog, fight-for-yourself environment. We actually, because one of the things that we set up in the process was, please, by all means, if you want to sit together and play, even though you have computers in the lab, yeah, go ahead and discuss ideas. No. People wanted to book their own lab time. They didn't want to know when other people were going. They wanted to find out if they could use another lab. So it created a literal virtual war between students in the class because people were focused on two things: getting the best score and getting the best grade. So we created an element of healthy but unhealthy competition. We're glad that we're engaged, but it was a vicious sort of trip you down the stairs in the lab type thing to get to the computer process. The other thing was transparency. And this was something where I have to admit that, again, one of the assumptions, lessons learned from doing this as a pilot on such a large scale and integrating it into the full curriculum as opposed to just an experiment. We were not as transparent with some of our expectations as we should have been. And by that, I mean simple things like when we talk about students playing this game and having access, we didn't think of things like unsupervised lab time because we just assumed that students would book their time the regular way and they would not be in the lab trying to cheat and do it on their own. We didn't think of things like, okay, fine, if we had to move from one lab to the next because of whatever situation, because we have our own labs, what would happen if the game moved and they didn't save and that type of stuff. So we had a lot of issues where we had to be very transparent and say to them, right, you need to back up. You need to do these things. But we didn't think of them in the first iteration. When we ran the game the second and third year, we did. But in the first year, we just said, well, yeah, everybody's going to basically, when they do it, they're going to save their profile. And if they move to another computer in another lab from business school to engineering to play because there's no room, yeah, of course, they're going to do it. No. The other thing we didn't think about in terms of transparency is language. So for instance, with the Chinese students, some terms were not familiar. And they're using Google Scholar to explain a term that is specifically risk management related, which they may not have an actual translatable version of. And we just assumed the game's in English. Everyone's done their TOEFL, everybody should be fine. Nope. Boy, were we wrong. So then you had to create a Chinese English version of every single concept to make sure that they explain it so that they knew what they were doing. And the other thing was, this was the easy one, but it was a lesson learned. Authenticity. And that refers to the game itself. We use this disaster relief. Some students would have preferred something more business-oriented. We couldn't provide that because we just didn't have access to it. But the students at first, there was some, and you will see it in the feedback, where they were like, we want a game that's related to projects in business. We don't want UNDP or Red Cross type games. We want something that's building an app in a corporate environment or something like that. So we had to be very careful as we went along in terms of the authenticity of the concept. Within that reflection, these were some of the key things that I pulled out. It's not enough to select a game to supplement the experience. You have to integrate it fully into the experience of learning. That's one of the first things. So it's not just, I need to kill 3 hours in my workload where I can be working on my research papers and working with my PhD students and more interesting stuff. If I can get 6 hours out of this where they play, I've gotten rid of them, thank God, and I can sit in my office and do something else. No, you have to do it from the standpoint of looking at what the value proposition is of this game that you're going to choose and understanding that. So the other things are there and they're pretty self-explanatory. On this side again, we come back with don't underestimate the administrative burdens, buying, etc. Measurement is also key, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about now, because that's one of the stuff. So this is basically, and I think Sue's going to put it up, how I mapped the process. So basically, when we looked at the student feedback, these were some of the things that we mapped. Can't see it well, but these were the things that came out when we pulled it through in vivo, and we looked at the student feedback. So this was one group, this was the other group. So clarity of the game was one of the things. Other things were like how real world it was. So we mapped those things by looking at all the qualitative feedback in vivo to basically gather that information. And we pulled that out and we said, okay, fine, at least we're getting a sense from an analytic standpoint of what it is. The other thing we looked at here, so if you look on this side, this is pre-game scores. This is before the game. This is before me as well, before I joined. This is what happened after. So you have in both population groups, you have a tremendous appreciation for the use of the game. So we went from, it's okay, ticks the box, to, yeah, we really like this is what we want more of, type stuff. So we had better teaching reviews as a result of that, but the first and the second. The other thing is, looking at the analytics, we also improved all our scores. Notice they stayed relatively consistent for 2 years in a row compared to where they were before. And from a qualitative perspective, these were some of the things they said. This is just their comments. You know, it would have been better to add some real cases with it. For instance, the ones in red are what I call the not so good. The ones in black are the good. More group work. Even though they didn't want to play the game together, they wanted more group work after the game. You know, that was one of the things. One of the other things that they flagged was we want to learn more about real cases rather than theory. So they also wanted more of this stuff and less of the theory. But the problem is we can't balance it. This gives you an idea. So we also did an analysis in terms of looking at some different factors. So forget the statistics for the time being. So we looked at in terms of what was the distribution of where people were in terms of the key things that we would measure from a project management perspective. So cost. We have a relatively normal distribution. So everyone they had 150, everybody stayed between 120 and 130, which was really positive. The other thing is time. Most people went over by 2 days, on average. They were never able to accomplish it within the time. They went over by 2 days. Also, when we looked at delays in relation, males and females really didn't perform differently because we looked at it from a gender perspective. There was no difference between cost and time analysis of female students in the class managing their budget or male. And finally, we looked at it from a correlation perspective. The primary stakeholder is the one with the least correlation. That's the one that was the hardest for them to correlate in terms of balance. They could not achieve that as easily as they thought. So where are we going to next in terms of, so now that we've done this, and this was one cohort, we're on to the second cohort now to do the measurements. And the first thing is, basically I'm going to go back in after I'm finished here and do the analysis of the second set of data. We have another set of data, and then we're going to be able to compare this across 3 years. We also have a ton of qualitative data because we made them do these reflection exercises. So they're basically a reflection abstract of no more than 400 to 500 words, and we're going to run these through an NLP, a natural language processing algorithm, where I will choose some keywords. It will pull out all the relevant stuff from an analytics perspective, and then we will go through to see if there's a consistent theme and use of those concepts first, and then a second reading through where we will do a deeper analysis to see where their reflection is. So we're using the AI that we have to be able to do that. The other thing that we're going to do is basically, once we get that done, is do a literature review, because of course at the end of the day it's all about publication for us. Publish or perish. So basically, since I don't want to perish, I have to publish. And basically start doing the literature review with my doctoral students on this, which they've already started, and then look at some publication timelines. Once a publication is available, I've already said to Sue that I will make it available to everyone in here before it goes out to the general public. Just don't share it with anybody else because the publishers will kill me. You know, has nothing to do with me. I'm fine with it. The publishers are not happy because they want you to pay for it. So that's the thing. And then basically we're going to move on to the new game because we've designed 3 new games, 1 for ops and supply and 2 for risk. They're all board games that we're going to be using now with the executive education cohorts from the fall of this year. So hopefully, and also some Lego, because we're going to look at some constructive thinking around having them do some project management and construct something and see how they do with that respect. And that's it. So questions? Well, him first and then you, sorry.
What percentage of the grade, students' grade, was based on their performance in the game?
About 25%.
Okay.
Yeah, so we took a significant amount of it. And the reason for that is that the game produces an actual report of all their decisions.
And did the game map well to the actual academics of project management?
About 70%, not 100, but
Okay.
about 70%, which was fine. We couldn't go beyond that. I would have liked to get beyond, but we got about 70% of what I was looking for. So when I took the baseline terminology that the game used, and I looked at the baseline terminology in terms of theory,
Yeah.
we had about 70% covered, and that was fine. So that's how we were able to weigh that right. For this assignment, we can do this.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Project management is so collaborative. I don't know if that was a concern of yours or not, that they wanted to do the game by themselves instead of in groups. So other than like requiring that, like, is that a concern, or have you thought about how to make it more, that they'd be more willing to work together?
Yes, it was a concern.
Yeah.
It was a war that I didn't want to fight, because you don't want to be amongst 150 hostile students who want to be on their own. You don't want to be in the room when they're arguing. You want to leave the room. So it was a very big concern for us in terms of that respect. How we're getting over it is, with the producers of this game, we're moving towards a 4-player version. Yeah, so no one will be able to influence the game by themselves anymore. They will have to work as a team. And we introduced we replaced our MSc dissertation with a game, a complete simulation, where they work in 4s now. And that, again, has improved scores.
A game instead of a district.
Yes, so they don't have so they write, what they do is they play the game, and the game literally lasts for 6 weeks. They cannot finish before 6 weeks' time. And what they have now is we've taken away the 20,000 word dissertation, and we have an 8,000 word reflection capstone project plus the game. So we look at the analytics behind that, and then we also look at the analytics behind what they're doing in terms from a sentiment analysis in terms of their reflection. It is a lot of work, a hell of a lot of work, but, and I will say it again, a hell of a lot of work, but it is well worth it because you see the benefits. I mean, we've had literally about a 25 to 27% increase in overall performance. So we no longer have any students graduating at the pass level. They do not get a pass degree. Everyone's at merit, the bulk are at merit, and then a couple, and more at distinction before. Before, in most cases, we didn't even have people getting to the distinction level. So the equivalent of a 4.0 or 3.98 or 3.8 didn't exist. Question? Sorry.
Yeah. Were there any difficulties working with the company that were going to make the game for you? Did you run into any problems? How long did that process take, and how did you get the funding? You have to go back and try and get the money once you know how much it's likely to cost.
So, no problems with the vendor. I met them through a different experience. I actually met the vendor at a conference, and we hit it off immediately. And basically, they had this game, so there was very little that I needed to do in terms of making changes. So that was fantastic. The funding, boy oh boy, the funding. What happened is that basically, it's fortunate to come from a finance background. I did some ratchematics, in ratchematics, a ratch of my mathematics in terms of my budget, and I pulled the money out of of the program budget, because that was the only way I was going to get it. So basically what I did is that I scaled back on my open house activities for the year that I introduced that game. And then basically I made a deal with the funders where I said, if I do this, you get access to all the performance data so that you can basically leverage this game to your customers. It worked so well that we won an award together at the British Learning Game Conference in London in 2017 because of this. And we actually beat the Metropolitan Police Authority and Schlumberger in terms of that respect. So
Check in with what it was.
So I'll tell you. So, and that basically gave us freebies. So they reduced the rate to nothing. So we literally went from paying 200 per license to £10. So you can, basically you were spending like the equivalent of less than £2,000 to get an entire class done. So that helped with the challenges in that respect. Would I do it again? No. Just one more question, but I can take it while I'm wrapping up from the guy in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering what type of interaction the students are having with the game. How do they lock in their decisions in steering the game?
In terms of the actual play, or in terms of, there's a set of decision rules. So basically, the game actually runs instructions on what to do, and it's written as a narrative. It's not written as an actual sit and play game. So before you even play, you have a sort of meet and greet session with all the stakeholders and all the team members. And you play through those things. They have a series of questions and decisions. And if you don't get through that, you don't get to the next set. So for instance, if you start off the game, you'll get a welcome from the CEO of the company, and he will do a briefing. And after that briefing, there's certain decisions that have to be made. And that's how they start the process. And then when they're finished with that decisions, he would say, okay, you should now talk to my lead project person or logistics person.
They're all predefined?
Yes, they're all predefined. But you cannot go from stage. So if you fail that part, you can't even get to the island.
So it's basically linear?
Yes, it's linear in that respect. We would like it to be a little bit less linear, but unfortunately it isn't. So I'm around if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, next year, if I'm here, I will have all the data, and I'll be focusing on how to do the analytics. So you'll get all the measurement stuff. Even if I'm not here, I'll still make sure that it's available. So